Hey everyone, welcome to the Path to Pro series. My name is Jake Middleton, and in this video I chat with Martina Čubrić, who is the sports psychologist for Mad Lions, and my fellow esports performance manager, Matt Fisher. We chat about mental health in esports, covering topics such as personal challenges esports players face, the grind culture's impact on mental health issues and burnout, and tips for aspiring pro players. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Welcome, Martina and Matt. Thanks so much for being a part of the show. I'm excited to talk to you about mental health in esports. For those that don't know, can you tell us just a little bit more about yourself, your background, and what you do?
Martina, you're a special guest. Why don't you go first?
Am I a special guest? Okay, thank you.
Absolutely.
Uh, all right, so my name is Martina. I am originally from Croatia, but for the past 6 years, Spain has got me and has kept me. I've studied here psychology, finished a master's in sports psychology, and straight from my internship in Mad Lions, I got a contract 2 years ago. So it makes it now for 2 years full-time part of a professional esports organization, a big brand as well. We've become Mad Lions. I have been active with 3 teams. Now I'm trying to prioritize a little bit more into Counter-Strike and our academy team in Madrid. And from the beginning, LEC I was always involved in LEC, but as the time goes and I get better at what I do, also I need to pick and choose and place my focus better and to be able to actually do in-depth work. So esports has been my main occupation for the last 2 years, and then basketball is my passion on the other side. So I always have a side project when it comes to basketball coaching on the side. Yeah, so that's all about me.
Awesome. I just want to say big props to all the work that you and the others have been doing at Mad Lions and the team's recent successes.
Thank you. That's such a team effort. And I know you're probably referring to LEC, which is a huge, let's say, crown of all our teams. But this has started 2 or even 2 years ago. Like when we all got together, when Splice has become Mad Lions, when Peter was there already, this has started building up before, and every year, you see it getting better and better, and now pretty fine.
I feel like that's quite the understatement. Pretty fine. Yeah, no, the long-term investment over 2 years is definitely showing, and I think that's really the model of what a lot of other organizations around the world could and should be doing, and hopefully are moving that right direction. But yeah, I'll jump in. My name is Matt Fisher. I'm an esports performance manager with Adamas. My background does come from traditional sports. I made the change into esports about 3 years ago, and then for the last year or so have had the amazing opportunity to be working with Jake here at Adamas. Undergrad was in psychology. I did a master's in exercise science, so I spent most of my time working with sort of traditional sport athletes, a lot of them in the Canadian landscape with a lot of our national and Olympic teams. And currently, fingers crossed, finishing up a master's in mental health counseling in the next month or so. We'll see if I can survive the potential burnout strains there. And yeah, with Adamas, had a lot of diverse opportunities to work with teams from Overwatch to League of Legends to Call of Duty, and yeah, getting more and more opportunities to really learn more about the different esports as we go.
Fantastic. So mental health and esports, there's a lot to talk about here. I think a good place for this conversation to start could just be talking about some of the personal challenges that each of you have seen through your work in the space when it comes to mental health. So I'll kind of just open it up to the floor, and we can kind of just start where you think we should start.
So you mean more of a personal, as a professional, my challenges that I've found in the field?
Well, so actually that too, I think would be really good to talk about. But also as a practitioner working with the teams that you work with, what have you seen as the challenges for the players themselves and the teams?
Yeah, so I can zoom in. When I started, I think that things have been evolving, and that the challenges have been getting, let's say, manageable the more resources we have offered to the players and the more we have actually talked about it. So not necessarily worked, only even just talked about it. Sometimes you could always see, sometimes you could even see like there is improvement when we are present there as like sports psychologists or as any health practitioner, just the character there, someone standing, and the awareness is higher, and then sometimes somehow it's more manageable. But usual stuff that you always see is now in academies that we have our players who come, well, they're less experienced, that haven't been on a big stage, that haven't been playing in front of thousands and thousands people, even if it's only on a stream, right? They know the numbers. So I had a chance to meet quite a few rookies that got astonished and somehow, let's say, negatively, let's say, pushed over the edge when they came in a team, and all of a sudden they found themselves playing their own game, but in front of thousands and thousands of players. So that pressure and not having enough coping mechanisms and resources sometimes got the best out of them. Of course, something that I have to mention across all games is, and it's different, is the structure that Valve or Riot or have differential. Counter-Strike, you play a different, let's say, competitive year than in League of Legends. So Counter-Strike, a big topic is like no rest and continual games and playing until AM hours, something that's being looked upon now. And then in League of Legends, you had some super weeks. So I don't know, 2 days or 3 days of pracs and 3 days of official games. Imagine that in traditional sports, in NBA and stuff like that. That could be quite of a challenge. So so it's high intensity, high frequency combined with pressure. Those are the things that, push to surface some of the mental health issues that can find different, let's say, faces in the reality of life and different names.
Yeah, no, adding on to that point that Martina just made there, I think a lot of the mental health issues that you see below the surface are only exacerbated by the challenges of all of a sudden, being put on that main stage. And, burnout, of course, is the one that's commonly talked about. But when it comes to some of the issues of anxiety, depression, personal self-worth, identity, really connecting your personal value to your ability to make a pro squad or stay on it, and how that challenges the mental health. And then knowing, of course, the overall toxicity of the online environment, that extra level of scrutiny that I think even some traditional sport superstars don't necessarily face in the same way. And for a lot of these esports athletes, just looking at the demographics, we look at the ages of a lot of these athletes where, the moment they're signed or the moment they hit 18, they get signed to a big, pro contract. And they're trying to find themselves, this transition from sort of adolescence into young adulthood, how many mental health challenges there are there. And then, like Martina said, you throw on top the high pressure environment. It's just making all of these things that much worse. And I think one of the additional challenges that I see is just even a lack of recognition that some of these things are mental health issues versus performance related issues. And as Martina alluded to there, that inability to actually get proper rest and recovery and actually get out of a constant, distressed state, I think is really, really a difficult challenge for a lot of these athletes. That's not just affecting their performance, but is affecting their personal well-being.
Yeah. I mean, you talked about how the age of these players are usually very young, around 16, 17, 18, maybe early 20s. So we know there's a lot of mental health issues with that demographic. And Martina, like you said, sometimes just having like a sports psychologist there or someone on staff in itself can help kind of bring out that awareness and kind of help with some of these things. But you also talked about like the problems with being able to cope. And so some interesting research that I've seen has shown that like esports players do have the same number of stressors as traditional sports athletes, and even maybe more so in some situations. So What do you think, or what are some good coping strategies that players can learn, and what can they utilize to kind of help deal with these stressors, or to help minimize these stressors as much as possible?
Yeah, I like to answer this question always with the least fancy answer you can find ever, because that's usually the most practical and effective way to deal with stressor is like, hang out with your friends, talk to your family, eat properly, do some exercise, like all the boring answers you can think of that are the most impactful, but are just like taken aside because the thought of becoming pro is entangled with playing insane amount of hours. Why? Because it's been out there, and that's been the only truth out there so far. I think we're getting now to the other side of like, okay, do we want to follow Korean cultural approach where they play for literally for 13 to 16 hours or just sit on the PC? Is that something sustainable, or you just want to reach the peak and then fall down? So some of the routines have always been the most impactful to actually add to these coping tools. And this is very individual, right? Usually what I do in my teams is to show the variety of routines they can have: the morning, the evening, the post scrim, the pre-scrim, and pick and choose, So most of the players who are disciplined enough to follow these routines in the end have the highest energy to cope with whatever comes and whatever's thrown at them in scrims. And sometimes we literally throw things at them in scrims. So you need to be ready to literally cope with situations that are out of your control, with the losses that are heavy stomps that happen. League of Legends snowball. It can happen even to best teams. We could actually see that in MSI. On top teams, these things happen. So routines for me are the answer for the players who are looking for coping mechanisms, right? Because in the end, we're talking about, I want to have energy to deal with all these things. And if I waste my energy in making so many decisions and not having anything to fall back on, a structure, then we're looking at almost for sure like kind of explosion or breakdown in a week, a month, 2 months time, whatever it is.
I couldn't agree more. And it's that we always talk about low hanging fruit, some of those simplest things, those behavior changes that we can start that may not seem like it directly correlates with mental health, but we know the research, whether it is coming from traditional sport or workplace organizational psychology, we know that long hours, we know that working late into the early mornings are not conducive to this mental health. And I think that one of the things that, realizing that a lot of organizations still don't have or are not willing to provide the budget for a sports psychologist or another mental health practitioner, giving these athletes the tools to create better routines where they can have a little bit more of, I guess, a direct hand in their own mental health, I think is the way to start. Eventually, knowing that some of these athletes do require maybe one-on-one work with a mental health practitioner. But in the meantime, yeah, if that's not available, what can we be doing to help them help themselves, empower their own coping mechanisms? And as Martina said there, so many of these come down to eating better, getting some exercise. We know, unfortunately, that oftentimes these athletes are thrown into situations where they are powerless, whether it's, the organization or the team schedule mandates, whether it's the way the leagues plan things out. And with just, once you get going, you have no chance to take a break, whether it's, new patches and new metas that you absolutely have to learn. What are those little things that we can try and help them out within the current environment that we know needs to be optimized? Hopefully in the future, those more systemic changes will happen. But in the meantime, yeah, those smaller little changes can make such a big difference.
I just want to emphasize what you said there. It's not that the companies or the teams don't have the budget. They have the budget. They always have the budget. If you take 10% or 5% from 5 players' salaries, you have enough to actually put a health practitioner in your team. So the not have, I never bought into that. What I see when they say I don't have, it's like I don't care. Thus, if you don't care, I don't care either, right? The companies, and this is something also for people who want to, players who want to go pro, is like, really be careful what you choose, because it's not that the teams want you. You also need to want the teams. So in our process of recruitment, of selection of players, that's something I emphasize a lot. Yeah, we called you on because we see you have talent and you've reached high level on your own, usually if we pick rookies and new players. But you also need to ask us questions and see if, you're willing to do these routines. You're ready to sacrifice most things that you have. We have all of these resources. Same thing goes for companies that say, I want you to play 15 hours a day. Are you ready for that? I don't know, right? So that part of like, where are you going into is something that, people would say, I can't afford to choose. Okay. But you can ask at least and prepare yourself like, this is what I'm going into, because there are a variety of companies and teams that prioritize different things. So really make an informed decision.
That's such a good point there, and to me that comes down to I guess mental health literacy of a lot of these athletes. Is, do they have a knowledge and understanding of what resources could be available? And like you said, Martina, some organizations are going to prioritize that, some of them are going to minimize that. And so knowing for your own personal well-being, as well as the potential success and longevity of your career, does it make more sense to take less of a salary by going to this team where I know I'm going to be in a healthier, more supportive environment? But I think oftentimes, these athletes are put in positions where they take whatever, is given to them. So if they have greater knowledge of, how can the environment I put myself in really affect both my performance and my longevity, they will be able to make more informed decisions that are going to help themselves out. So I think that's such a great point.
Or do I sign a 2-year contract, 5-year contract, or 1-year contract?
Yeah.
There's negotiation in there, right? Like, how long can I last in such an ecosystem?
Yes.
Right. But yeah, again, this is a little bit advanced, let's say, thinking ahead. I know that most young players, if they get an offer, they're all over it and they're like, yeah. But yeah, I think there's more to it long term.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because, most aspiring pro players may not be thinking about these things. So if you're listening to this is definitely something to consider. You talked about the kind of the grind culture and how in esports it's pretty much just about playing the game as much as possible, where recovery is not necessarily as prioritized. And because of this, I think that's why we do see a lot of the mental health issues and the burnout and things like that. And of course, it's outside of some of the controls. So like with the CSGO league structure, like you talked about, and other games as well, which have seen some advances in some leagues, which is great to see, and hopefully we see more of that down the road. But like, how can this kind of like culture and this kind of mindset and belief, how can this change in this space over time? And like, how do you go about that with the players that you work with?
I can jump on it. Oh yeah, I'll jump onto that one. Well, and like you said, Jake, this to me, it's going to have to be what would I say, proof in the pudding. We can have all the research as practitioners outside of these organizations and structures to say this is going to be better for cognitive fatigue, et cetera, et cetera. I do think the more that we get metrics to quantify what we're trying to tell them we know, the more buy-in there's going to be. But we also know that we may be a few years away from that. I think that until you start to see some of these organizations, and you are starting to, who have made more of these long-term investments, and now maybe it doesn't pay off in the first year or two, but then they start to get that sustained success. I think that that's really what is hopefully going to kind of, I guess, force the industry as a whole to have that turning point and realize, okay, there's a better way to do this. I think so many of these leagues themselves, where they're still trying to establish their own business models. So a lot of organizations, well, if I want revenue coming in from sponsors or marketing, well, we need to be winning now. And maybe that allows them to have an okay business model for a year or two. But then if they have to start from scratch, is that 2-3 years before they get back to that? Whereas we know in a lot of traditional sports, they've gone through that and they've gotten to the point where it's like, it's actually a better business model to have sustained success and not be throwing out money just trying to get the best players, burn them out, get rid of them, try and start from scratch again. So I do think we need some more proof from organizations. I will even say, and not to just build Martina's ego up here, but when you look at, Mad Lions, who we know over the last couple of years have started to make these investments, more and more examples like that, I think, are really what's needed to start to show, even knowing, like, I'm big into Call of Duty and looking what the Toronto Ultra have done. You see that, and I don't know how long that's been going on for, but you see in between sessions some of the things these athletes are doing, whether it's just for emotional regulation. Like, to me, that's something that needs to be driven from an organizational level, and I think it's starting to pay dividends. So hopefully that continues to drive the rest of these organizations in the right direction.
Oh yeah. In our case, and I'm really blessed to be here. I mean, I've chosen to be here, so I've chosen carefully to stay here, and I've seen the evolution and how the research are being put in places that I believe in and we believe in as an organization, which is completely aligned with my values. But Toronto Ultra has resources. This is not YouTube knowledge, right? They have resources and they are taught to do that, and they are the resources, the people who are behind the performance coach. They're given trust by from the coaches, right? And when your performance coach has trust from the coach and is actually put out there and talked about as another part of the staff, as an integral part of the staff, this is when players start to listen, right? And when players start to listen, they will start doing. And when players start to do that, they will start to feel that. And when players start to feel that, we got them. And then when they win someone 246 against, right? You've seen the result.
Yes.
That, I hope, is going to slowly open people's eyes. Want to bring up another example. Rogue has a similar approach and has been having also this long-term approach, and 2 years exactly, like very similar to us. I think it's been showing. So yeah, the proof part of it, from my point of view, as you said, is the key. And the one thing that I try to kind of encourage the players that have more buy-in in my teams is like, talk about that. Like, you have a lot of interviews, you have a lot of mediatic impact, and you have to use that. Like, you can't use that. I would love for you to use that, but you have to use that. I mean, you're going to influence so many upcoming new players. So when I read and listen to a lot of interviews of pro players, and recently I have this folder like esports evidence, and it's been piling up, right? But 2 years ago, I couldn't find anything. Everyone was talking about, yeah, I've been playing all this time and I have all of this G Fuel, I don't know, whatever drinks, and I've been keeping up all night. And now they're like, yeah, I play and it's hard and I sacrifice, and then I need to take a break and then I come back, and yeah, it's all about like keep going and have a good mental. Okay, like we're getting there, right? So yeah, we are practitioners, health practitioners, and we are here to talk, but let's not fool ourselves. When Caps or Reckless or now Elior or Humanoid or anyone these mention something like that out there, this has a much bigger impact that all of us together could have, right? Because in this interesting community, what you have in your curriculum does not matter at all. Like, you can say I'm a doctor, sure, you'll be a doctor, but until I don't see it and feel it, I don't believe it. And if no one says the same thing, I don't care. So yeah, sure, some players are going to stay like that even if their colleagues say the same thing, but for sure more people are getting impacted and touched by correct messages in recent times.
Just one thing I'll jump on there that I think Martina said that's so important is we know there's enough research out there in traditional sports that coaches often have the greatest impact, even more than parents, more than peers, when it comes to adopting positive behaviors. And if coaches aren't believing in, like you said, what we're trying to do or what physical practitioners are trying to do, the buy-in from the athletes is just going to be that much more difficult. And coming back to the idea as well of having some prominent players coming out and speaking about what they're doing, obviously there's still that stigmatization when it comes to mental health, and knowing in high performance environments, mental performance is often seen as like, okay, well, that's a positive, that's an okay thing. Mental health is a weakness, and there's this fear that if I'm struggling with a mental health issue, are my teammates going to be worried about me? Are my coaches not going to think that I'm going to be able to perform when the time comes? And so knowing that is not necessarily a weakness, that's something that we're all faced with, at one level or another, and being able to take that stigmatization out there, out of that conversation, I think is going to be such an important step as well. So like you said, getting some more of these top people to actually be comfortable enough to talk about their experiences and what they're doing to address them, I think is, like you said, going to be another key to greater adoption of these positive behaviors.
Yeah, as much as I would like to think that we have such a huge impact on the culture of esports, and I know we will as we continue to go about it, it definitely comes from the players. It comes from the influencers. The more that they can do it, the greater community is going to be listening to them. And so, yeah, I hope to see more of that in the future. And I think organizations can really, push that stuff through content and things like that in the future, which could be helpful for everybody. But I wanted to bring up also something I've seen a lot is a lot of players who, they'll go to Twitter after a game and they'll talk about, maybe they played really bad. Maybe they'll talk about, how they're feeling. And I've seen a lot of players tie their self-worth to their performance. And so in esports, where it's kind of like you're on all the time, how can players learn to not necessarily get so tied up in that, knowing that, like, even though it is a separate thing, their performance is still a part of who you are in a way?
I think one thing that I've seen, and this is not exclusive to esports at all, is that understanding of identities. We often adopt, a primary identity, because maybe that's, if I'm literally got headphones on and in front of a monitor all day, my primary identity is going to be as an esports, athlete. And it's so easy to, like you said, Jake, to tie our self-worth to that. Oftentimes what I've done with traditional sport athletes is we talk about what are your other identities that you have out there, and where do your personal core beliefs and values fit in with each one of these identities. Are you a son or a daughter, a brother or a sister, a friend? Are you a student? Are you a teacher? All of these other areas that we can carry a lot of self-worth that isn't tied specifically to an outcome. So much of esports is based on outcomes that we know are out of our control. We can obviously put ourselves in hopefully the best position to achieve that outcome, but at the end of the day, there's things that are just uncontrollables, and if we tie our self-worth to that, we're going to be in trouble. So I think really helping a lot of these athletes to understand that they are more than just the results of competition, I think, is really important. And how can we know, especially when we look at the I guess, lack of longevity in careers, how quickly you can go from being at the top, upper echelon of your sport to you no longer have a career, and how much of your self-worth is tied to that, and your ability to transition to the next stage of your life is really going to be difficult if that was all tied to one specific outcome of performance in esports.
Yeah, that's a great point. Oof, I have so many answers on this one and examples, but I've seen so many things that are masochism. Like, I'm going to go on Twitter after we lose, and I'm going to destroy myself by reading every single comment that is like, I don't know, it's they do this automatically mostly, but sometimes they overdo it by staying on Reddit even and reading everything there is, right? So I've seen that. I've seen one thing how we actually go about this is, as I mentioned, like, this sharing part is a very big, let's say, very big part of the approach that we have is, let's speak about this before it actually happens. So in the beginning, we actually define what is social media for us as a team. Like, how do we want to be in social media? What do we want to give out in social media? Because also, like, these guys, some come from their bedroom, and onto the big stage and with the cameras and interviews, it's very easy to slip some stuff in the interviews. And we had that in prior years. This year, I have to say, pretty good. Pretty good. I think they've got used to the cameras. Of course, more exposure, better. Also, us filming content for the team as well helps, although it's so annoying for them, but oh well, they get better. So we speak about like how much importance do we want to put on that. What is the suggested, recommended, ideal way to deal with social media on the day of games? So some limit themselves to, I don't know, tweeting one thing, two things, not reading comments. Some limit themselves to completely shut it down. Some don't care at all. I've seen players as well who are like, I think of today and maybe tomorrow, but what happens in the next 3 days, completely don't care. So again, these are some, limitations, individual differences that, apart from like talking as a group, what does social media mean to us, it's also that which falls back to the values, what you said, Fishan. What are your beliefs and how do you want to take this on? So I think it's like work on two fronts, but yeah, some behavioral, let's say, mechanisms of just eliminating it at some points and limiting yourself are, well, probably most effective when it comes to being in like high pressure situations and in competitions and tournaments.
Yeah, completely agree. When it comes to like, so for aspiring professionals, what would be some like practical tips that you would give them? Going back probably to the point of like, again, this isn't like the sexy stuff that people are looking for. Like, give me the pill that's gonna help me, improve and feel better and, hit every shot. But like, what are some like practical things that you would recommend for aspiring pros to improve their mental health, but ultimately improve their self-efficacy?
The way I always start, and this can go into so many different directions, is just that idea of self-awareness, of knowing what are your actual thoughts that are going through your head before, during, after matches. And again, coming back to I think Martina touched on this much earlier, that's we know how important a strong social network is, regardless, whether this is due to COVID, whether this is due to whatever it might be, and understanding whose opinions do you actually value? Who are those people that actually know you as a person and you trust? And I think one of the difficulties with esports, and maybe it's a little bit different currently in the COVID world, but this is where some of those ideas of centralization can actually work against the mental health of these athletes. We can start to rob them of their closest trusted connections, where, you know what, it matters more about what your best friend that you've known for 10 years, having a conversation with them is a lot more important than what some random keyboard warrior on Reddit is going to be saying about you. And coming back to that age demographic thing, this is one of those periods where a lot of these athletes are really trying to find their social identity, knowing in, high school, we're often forced into social circles because this is what class you're put in and this is the area that you live in. And whether it's going to university, whether it's going out into the job world, whether it's going into the esports world, this is when the time when a lot of these young people are trying to find their identity as an adult. And when you're listening and being shaped by a bunch of faceless people on social media, how can we convince them or let them know that you need to have a filter of what should actually be worth your time and attention? Of course, it's easier said than done, but even some small things like Martina said, and this comes even to the performance side, it's like, you know what, maybe you do need to shut off Twitter 4 hours before your first match. Maybe you aren't allowed looking at your social media feeds right after, whether it's win or lose. But again, so much of it, I think, comes down to that self-awareness. How many of these young athletes we've worked with who just don't even realize how tilted they get with nothing to do with their performance? It's all about people's opinions that really, really don't mean anything, but they take it as gospel.
Yeah, great points. I want to expand. For example, you said self-awareness, right? We all can reflect. We are creatures that have thinking and meta thinking, and we are skillful and complex in that. Now, just because we have it doesn't mean we use it. And even if we use it, it doesn't mean that we go to places which are going to be effective, long-term, and impactful. So with all that said, even though there are barriers like money, time, beliefs, I really think, and this comes because I also go to a psychologist and I have been to different ones and I know what that brings to you, but put yourself in hands of a professional. It doesn't have to be forever. It can be just go there and see the dynamics, see the tools that can be offered, see the world from different perspective, expand your perspective, but start getting these different ways of looking at things and maybe learning new things of how to approach and cope with situations, because you alone, because you're a human being, are going to avoid uncomfortable situations, are going to avoid thinking of the tough stuff, are going to avoid exposing yourself to stuff like that. So if you are actually accompanied by someone who's professional, knows what he's doing, and can push you a little bit in the direction that eventually is going to pay off, that money and that time is worth 100%, right? And what happens to most is that either they're pushed or they're put in an organization that offers these resources, but they take time to actually say, okay, this was worth it. And I've seen this on myself, I've seen this in clients, they don't have to be grateful now, but in a year or two, that's like, I know that seed is going to flourish one day or another. So even if you don't see it now, I can assure you, you will see that one day, and maybe when it's most important. So for me, that little piece that seems like a huge step is actually comfortable if you place yourself in the hands of a professional who knows how to accompany you in whatever you're doing. So for me, that's like an obvious, let's say, go-to, just to start with. You need to want it. Sometimes you need to be pushed, but that is definitely going to open a lot of doors. So maybe this is a little bit more of a complex answer, that there you will find like all of these things. I can mention some of the easier ones that can be done alone, but again, for me, this is like the ultimate top level. So some things such as that, expanding your interest, right? Because in the end, being a professional versus playing games in your room is going to be different. Come responsibilities, come contracts, dealing with finances, dealing with fandom, even though you're not thinking they're going to have fans, but people are going to follow you. So find other interests, like find ways to use your time for yourself. So who are you? That's part of the self-understanding, like self-awareness, like you said, is quite important. So you can actually draw a line between, okay, now I'm working, and yes, it's my lifestyle, but now I want to do me, right? Now I want to disconnect for a little bit, so tomorrow I come with like full energy. And again, going back to that routines, like find your things, right? What works for you. Test all you want now, because later you won't have too much time to test, or testing is going to be costly and you can't test at all times when you're a professional. It can cost you your job, actually. So test all you can now, and then of course when you go to pro and you have a different level, you're going to test still, but let's say that the opportunities are going to be lesser. So yeah, I've seen many incoming new players now that I'm so happy to see, like, because yeah, I tried caffeine, I tried all drinks, I tried staying up late, I tried all things, you have cold showers, all things, and now I realize this and this and that. Perfect. I'm here to provide you with resources and open the doors you need and make time for that. You just do you, right? So this is very rare. The players come to me like that, but whenever it comes, I was like, where did you come from? Bring your friends, please.
Yep, so satisfying. Those are amazing tips. I'll just add to that, like to the social media conversation. If you have notifications turned on, I recommend just turn the notifications off so that you can get on social media on your own time. It's not that notification that you see that pumps up on your phone, and then it's just, asking you to hop on the phone. That's one tip I would say, but of course there's a lot of others as well, exercise, eating right, mindfulness, and things like that. But back to your point, Martina, find things that work well for you and establish those routines early on. This has been fantastic. I want to thank you both so much for your time and having this chat. Where can people find you online?
Online. I'm not taking too much care of my online, but you can find me on Twitter. Martina Čubrić with Cubric. That's where I post some stuff. Instagram, I also post some things, but they're not very much focused on the topic. I give myself more freedom there. And then if you can leave my email for people who are interested or want to chat up about anything, open, then always try to, but really for real, answer to everyone. And so far, manageable. So hit me
Awesome.
up for free. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, for me, Twitter as well. Go by Matt Fisher at Coach Matt Fisher, and then for where you can find me more in a professional capacity is I'd say probably just our website with Adamas Esports.gg. So be happy to hear from you in either one of those mediums.
Awesome. Thanks again. Cheers, guys. I hope you all enjoyed this video. Big shout out to Martina and Matt for the conversation around mental health and esports. And thanks again for watching. Stay tuned for more Path to Pro Series videos coming up each month.